The only one keeping him in power is the NDP leader. And now they're complaining that Canadians might choose me if there were an election. That's not their choice. It's not my choice. It's not any of their choices. That's the decision of the Canadian people.
Jagmeet Singh getting called out on his Maserati. Welcome back to Moose on Loose. My name's David, and today's top stories here in House session. Pierre is humiliating not only Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh at the same time, bringing up the fact that Melanie Joly did a sit-down interview with the New York Times about becoming the new successor of the Liberal Party. While at the same time, Pierre points out Jagmeet's Maserati and Trudeau's new tax on Canadians. Let's jump into this. So next up, we got this clown, Jagmeet Singh. He's holding a press conference here, and he is asked about his car, which is a over $200,000 Maserati.
Can I ask you, the Conservatives are criticizing you for driving a Maserati. Is that your car?
No.
And what do you make of their criticism?
The Conservatives are silly. They do silly things all the time. They lie all the time. They don't care about the truth. They know that they're lying and they'll do it anyways. What I'm concerned is about people getting relief. What Pierre Poilievre is concerned about is playing games in the House. And one of the things that No, not at all. It's not mine at all.
No, it's not my car. No, whose car? That's not my car. What is this?
It's someone else's. So what has become very clear?
Someone else's car.
The Conservatives would love.
Oh, he snapped there. He had a little break. That little chuckle there. He got caught in his own lie.
Love to just lie about whatever, make up whatever. But the facts in front of them are, the facts in front of people are, they voted against giving people a break. They voted against. I have nothing to do with it. I was not driving it. I have nothing to do with it. So they voted.
He has nothing to do with the $200,000 SUV that he drives around. He has nothing to do with it. It's not his. What is this, Jagmeet? Is it your brother's? Your dad's? Whose car is it? Why won't he answer the question? It's his car. Somebody run the plates on that thing. What we're talking about here today is this. So we can see this Maserati here, which the plates have been blurred out on this thing. This guy pulling an extra suit out of his Maserati, Gucci handbag. A man of the people. Why doesn't he just answer the question, say, yeah, that's my Maserati? Jumping over to the House of Commons, we've got our Wednesday session now in motion.
This week, Prime Minister has lost control of everything. He's lost control of the borders, lost control of immigration, lost control of spending, and now has lost control of his cabinet and party. In fact, his foreign minister is now announcing her leadership campaign in the New York Times. The Liberal leader of the province of Ontario has announced she's against his quadrupling carbon tax. The Liberal Premier of Newfoundland is against his job-killing energy cap, and 20 of his MPs want to fire him. How is it that he clings to power when he's lost control?
Yeah. What Pierre is talking about here is this. Trapped by Trudeau to steer foreign affairs, she's now his possible successor. There's not a chance in this country she'll be leading anything. She won't even be leading a lemonade stand. Melanie Joly, Canada's top diplomat, has already faced off against India and China. Really? Is that what she did? With Donald Trump up next, she's also considered a top contender to replace Trudeau. This is so dumb. What is this? In what world? I guarantee you, I can go out and just pick out anyone. The garbage man who goes down the street. I'd rather him run the country. I don't know much about him. He waved to me once. That's good enough for me. I know he'd be better than her. So I'm not going to read this article here, but it basically goes on to talk about how she was trying to get pregnant with through vitro fertilization, and she didn't want to take the role as foreign affairs minister. And then Trudeau said, it would be a fantastic message you would send to the world. Trudeau just using everyone for whatever he wants. After consulting her husband, Miss Joly then relented, becoming Canada's top diplomat. It goes on to talk how she had a brief stint in television. She moved into public relations. Among her clients was this guy here who tried to buy the Montreal Canadiens. It raised her profile to a point where she tried to become the mayor of Montreal. Through fundraising for the arts, she met Alexandre Trudeau, Trudeau's brother, and then thus met Trudeau. And that was the credentials to be foreign affairs minister. You don't have to know anything about the global workings of the world. No. What else do we expect from Trudeau Liberals? Nobody's qualified for their job. Do you really expect us to believe there's nothing else going on here? Having someone that's going to always be flying away to different countries with you while you're traveling, Trudeau? Come on. It says here she'd be part of Trudeau's gender balanced cabinet. That's right. Trudeau doesn't pick who's best for the job. He wants to have everything nicely balanced for optics. Jumping back to the House.
You can all see that the leader of the opposition has trouble with the ideas that individuals might have different perspectives, and that might be a good thing for a robust political party like the Liberal Party of Canada and all its partners across the country. The leader of the opposition refuses to let his backbenchers or any of his team members have any opinions at all.
This guy quite literally threatened his own MP because his MP demanded that seniors and the disabled be included in those $250 checks. That guy was interviewed recently and he said he might be pushed over to be an independent because of this. Captain Schmuck is out of control.
He stands for muzzling his MPs. We stand for diversity.
Diversity of opinions, I guess that means the opinion that he should not be prime minister. That's the predominant opinion among liberals across the country. On the front page of the New York Times, you'd think the foreign minister would be fighting Trump's tariffs. Instead, she's fighting for her boss's job, where she's described in the headline as a possible successor after she sat down for a photo shoot and made the case. This on top of a Liberal leader in Ontario who's against his quadrupling carbon tax, a Liberal premier in Newfoundland who opposes his job-killing energy cap. Why won't the Prime Minister get the point? His party doesn't want him anymore.
And if she didn't like that headline, she would have told him, hey, I'm not going to do the photo shoot. I'm not going to do the interview. This really says a lot. This does. Like, all these liberals are starting to creep out of their little rat dens, trying to poke their heads out to see if now's the time. It's now the time. They all want Trudeau's job of this dead party.
Speaker, about standing up for Canada. One of the things we've seen throughout our history, when Canada is threatened, when it's challenged with a crisis, when people want ill of Canadians pull together across partisan stripes, across backgrounds, across the country to stand up for our neighbors, to stand up for Canadians. That's certainly what we were able to do as a country 8 years ago. Unfortunately, this basic Canadian attribute seems unavailable to that leader of the opposition who can't help himself on playing politics with Canadians' well-being.
Sorry, I'm a little bit confused here, Trudeau. I thought you were the one who trampled Canadians with horses, but then you let Palestinians burn Montreal. Sorry, I'm a little confused here.
Mr. Speaker, this is from a Prime Minister who is helping Donald Trump take away our jobs. You can just imagine the President in the Oval Office calling our businesses to say, hey, I saw that you have a quadrupling carbon tax north of the border. Why not come south of the border where there's no carbon tax and other taxes are falling? How about the latest electricity tax the Prime Minister is bringing in that will drive factories south of the border, or his energy cap that will drive away our resource companies? I understand why President Trump wants to take Canadian jobs, but why is this Prime Minister trying to help him do it?
The problem for the leader of the opposition is Canadians increasingly see through his shallow partisan games. If he actually cared about helping Canadians and cutting taxes, he wouldn't have voted against taking off the sales tax for Canadians for the next few months. Right. But he wants
that sales tax, if you didn't catch the morning video, turns out to be $39 per Canadian over the next 2 months. That's right. We'd all get $39 for this. And it costs businesses $500 to reprogram their machines. Congratulations, idiot. You've achieved nothing.
Canadians to continue to struggle because it benefits him politically, perhaps, instead of actually being there to solve the challenges Canadians are facing. That's not on, Mr. Speaker.
The Conservatives showed us who they really are. They voted against tax relief for the working class. And the Liberals want to jack up taxes on the 15th. Do Democrats believe the working class needs permanent relief? So will the Prime Minister permanently exempt the GST off of daily essentials like a kid's winter jacket?
Mr. Speaker, we're actually moving forward to suspend the sales tax for Canadians so that they can afford the basic necessities that they will need, whether it's fresh-made...
because Canadians can't afford the basic necessities.
Fresh-made produce whether it's fresh-made products at the groceries, whether it's dinner at a restaurant or even a fast food place for the family. These are things that Canadians will find less expensive over the coming months. Unfortunately, the Conservatives can...
He's just getting caught in his lies. There's already not GST on produce. That's why he's bumbling and fumbling like an idiot again.
Why were the Conservatives chirping? They proved that bootlickers are billionaires.
This guy's unbelievable. He's the ultimate bootlicker. Nobody has licked boots cleaner than Jagmeet Singh. He has licked Trudeau's boots so shiny, you could see the reflection of him standing next to his Maserati.
The opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims he's taking taxes off of fresh-made produce. He really does think that food comes from the grocery store, not from the farmers who actually grow the produce. That's why he, I guess, thinks he can carbon tax those farmers without taxing the food. And then you have his friend, the Maserati Marxist over there. They're both out of touch. Canadians are out of money. How about a carbon tax election?
Yeah. That's epic, Pierre. Perfect timing. That's the perfect slogan for sellout saying the Maserati Marxist.
Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition had the opportunity to axe the sales tax for Canadians, and he voted against it and forced his MPs to do exactly the same. He is only interested in his own political self-interest, not interested in helping Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says he's going to leave the economy to bankers. He says he doesn't think much about monetary policy, the budgets balance themselves, and that he's not very good with numbers, but he did get one thing right. He said that deficits cause inflation. So did his finance minister right before she introduced his budget, saying no deficit above $40 billion. So, straight up question, will the Prime Minister keep his word and cap the inflationary deficit below $40 billion?
I know the Leader of the Opposition is eager for our fall economic statement. If he really wants to see it, he could perhaps stop the obstruction of Parliament to allow us to move forward on dealing with Canadians and challenges that they are facing. But it's interesting that he...
No, that's not how that works. You have to tell what's going on in the government. And not only this, Pierre Poilievre announced today that he's going to allow them to have 2 hours to open up Parliament to deliver the information of the fall budget.
Trudeau has completely lost control of the deficit once again. Not only will we cooperate to let her introduce that fall update, we will actually give her a Christmas gift. We'll give her 2 hours out of our Conservative opposition motion day on Monday for her to stand on her feet and tell us how much she's lost control of the nation's finances.
Interest rates are coming down. That's why we can give a tax break to Canadians. That's why we're there.
So it's heading back up. They don't like to mention that.
The results are in on the Prime Minister's radical liberalization of hard drugs. He teamed up with the BC NDP to decriminalize fentanyl, crack, and heroin. He lowered jail sentences for mass producers of deadly fentanyl. And 80% of the fentanyl made in Canada is done so using ingredients that are not even regulated, but come right into our country where they're cooked into that poison, now threatening our trade relationship with the U.S. Will he reverse his radical liberal drug agenda to save lives and jobs?
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, we've seen that the Conservative leader's answer to this terrible tragedy hitting so many Canadians with the toxic drug epidemic is to stand for photo ops in front of encampments and try to use them for cheap votes.
Why are there encampments, Trudeau? That's the question. This guy doesn't even understand that world, what it's like to not be able to pay your bills.
To move forward, we've anchored ourselves in science, in working in partnership with municipalities, with frontline workers, with provinces. We will continue to be there for people.
You're there for no one.
The results are in. His radical liberalization of hard drugs has led to a 200% increase in overdose deaths. 47,000 people have died. The worst deaths have been in NDP-controlled BC, where the liberalization has been the most extreme. Worse, he's allowing 80% of the precursor chemicals used to make fentanyl come in unregulated and legally over our border to be used by criminals who get out because he softened the sentences. Now our trade relationship is threatened over it. Will he reverse this disastrous experiment to save the jobs and the lives of Canadians?
Mr. Speaker, what has become increasingly clear through the Leader of the Opposition's little performances is he doesn't actually care about Canadians and about people suffering. He is there for a clip, he's there for a photo op, but he's not there to do the work of delivering based on...
There for a photo op, like the guy who's at the Taylor Swift concert trying to find every little girl that wants to take a photo with him. This creep lord's got to go.
That's not serious. That's not responsible, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, what is not responsible is allowing 80% of the chemicals used in fentanyl manufacturing to come in unregulated and legally. What is not responsible is decriminalizing crack, heroin, and fentanyl, and then after you see that it leads to a massive increase in deaths, then 2 weeks ago, he, the Bloc, and the NDP all voted in favor of a committee report to decriminalize fentanyl right across the country at a time when Canadians are dying and our border could be closed. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he has reversed himself and now opposes decriminalization of fentanyl?
It's really terrible. I got a friend who works for a local government here, and bus drivers will stop their bus in the middle of a route and get off because there's people doing those hard candy in the back of the bus and they don't want to be exposed to it. That is how bad it is in British Columbia.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we see the priority of the Leader of the Opposition is to exploit and use Canadians who are suffering to score cheap political points.
This week, Prime Minister has lost the control of the cost of housing, which has doubled since he became Prime Minister. And just this week, the OECD published a report showing that Toronto and Vancouver are now the two most expensive housing markets in all of North America. Vancouver's housing is significantly more expensive than Seattle, even though Vancouverites make half as much money. Toronto's housing is more expensive than New York, even though New Yorkers make 50% more. Will the Prime Minister call a housing tax election so that we can bring it home?
Hear, hear. No, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader has been having a rough few weeks since he promised he would be shutting down housing projects across the country. Even his Conservative MPs have been going around behind his back complaining to the CBC that they can no longer advocate for their communities, complain that they're no longer allowed to stand up for their mayors who need investments in housing in their communities.
It's all lies from Trudeau. My God. Somebody find this guy. $3,000, one for each lie, and just this one rant.
Speaker, we don't complain to the CBC, we complain about the CBC. I digress. The Prime Minister says that if he gives more money to local bureaucracies, they'll speed up home building. So he gave $500 million to Toronto City Hall. What happened? Home building slowed down by 40%. He gave Vancouver City Hall $115 million, and housing construction slowed down 15%. Gave $176 million to Ottawa City Hall, construction down 22%. When will he learn that what we need in this country is to build homes, not bureaucracy?
Mr. Speaker, mayors across the country, including in Conservative-held ridings, are speaking out about the reckless cuts the Conservative leader is proposing to money that municipalities need to increase densification, to accelerate permitting.
This Housing Accelerator Fund is just a way to pay off mayors trying to get support for Trudeau. This guy is such a loser. Like, he is the worst person to be running our country.
So he gives tax dollars to big city politicians, and then he gives tax dollars to CBC to interview those big city politicians to say that they like getting the money. Well, Mr. Speaker, if giving more money to big city politicians were going to solve the problem, we'd have the most affordable housing in the world. After revenues for cities has grown twice as fast as inflation and population combined for 2 decades in a row. We don't need more money for bureaucracy and politicians. We need money in the pockets of home buyers and home builders. So why not my common sense plan to axe the sales tax, GST, and bring down housing costs by 50 grand?
Mr. Speaker, we're seeing the clear pattern of the Conservative leader. He picks fights with journalists, he picks fights with mayors and city councils, he even picks fights with the Team Canada approach that is standing up for Canada's interests, faced with real challenges from the incoming administration to our south. He is choosing to pick fights and divide.
There's a baby crying in here. Clearly the baby is distraught by the lies coming out of Trudeau's mouth.
Hiking taxes, debt, and inflation to pay off politicians in exchange for press releases and photo ops will not solve the problem. What it has done is doubled housing costs and made Toronto and Vancouver the most expensive housing markets in North America, worse than New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and many other places with more people and money and much less land. So here's a choice. He's afraid of a carbon tax election. Why don't we have a different kind? Why don't we have a housing tax election? where he proposes to give money to politicians, I propose to put it in the pockets of home buyers.
Speaker, if he really wanted to put money in the pockets of Canadians, he wouldn't have voted against the Canada Child Benefit. He wouldn't have voted against our initiatives to cut taxes for Canadians over the next 2 months. 8 out of 10 Canadian families across climate change and reduce emissions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Prime Minister has lost control, but he's clinging to power with the help of his NDP Liberal leader coalition partner, who said, I'm going to quote the NDP leader here. He said the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. He bemoaned the fact that the Teamsters and the ILWU were forced back to work, violating their right to strike. How can this Prime Minister cling to power with the help of someone who says he's too weak and too greedy to govern?
Speaker, the Conservative leader has spent the last few months in this House trying to demonstrate that Parliament can't work for Canadians. He's been obstructing debate. He's been obstructing our ability to move forward on delivering for Canadians. And indeed, every chance he gets, he votes against measures that would support Canadians, whether it's he just wants Canadians to believe that everything is broken. Well, it's not, Mr. Speaker.
That's right. Trudeau doesn't think Canada's broken. He thinks it's just right on track.
Canadians want to fire that costly Prime Minister. His MPs want to fire that costly Prime Minister. The only one keeping him in power is the NDP leader, who again says the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. Oh, and now they're complaining that Canadians might choose me if there were an election. That's not their choice. It's not my choice. It's not any of their choices. That's the decision of the Canadian people. So why doesn't he turn the decision over to the people who run this country, Canadians, in a carbon tax election?
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Conservative leader demonstrates that he's trying very, very hard to prevent anything from being delivered for Canadians, whether it was dental care, whether it's the tax break, the Canadian...
Come on, you guys haven't handed over those documents to the RCMP for 2 months. This is preposterous. They should all be in jail for what they've done.
His political argument relies on people being broken, Canadians being divided, people being angry. That's not the way we're going to...
We'll fix everything he broke, Mr. Speaker, as my great finance critic said. And, you know, let's start with the carbon tax. The Indian Resource Council announced today they will be presenting a resolution at the Assembly of First Nations Special Chiefs Assembly to take the Liberal NDP Prime Minister's carbon tax to court. They say, we will not stand by where our communities are pushed further into poverty by the tax we never agreed to. And they want to dispel any notion that lower income First Nations are better off with the carbon tax rebate. Mr. Speaker, why won't he listen to courageous First Nations people and have a carbon tax election?
Yeah, there's a separate other video, but First Nations are suing Justin Trudeau over the carbon tax. Just think of that.
Speaker, Indigenous people have been the first and have for the longest stood up to highlight the dangers of climate change, the impact of neglecting the environment, of not protecting our lands and our oceans, particularly against the previous Conservative government of which that member was a part.
I don't know the words. Blame Harper. Really? Again? You're getting sued by First Nations and all you're barfing out is how they're protectors of the land?
Reality is, Mr. Speaker, the Canada carbon rebate puts more money back.
It's talking down to First Nations people again. They said that they've done the research, and I quote, they want to dispel any notion that lower income First Nations are better off with the carbon tax rebate. In rural and remote communities where First Nations live, the tax dries up their food, their heat, and their transportation bill so much that the Ontario Liberal leader, Bonnie Crombie, has said, I promise you, I will tell the Prime Minister he is wrong on issues like the carbon tax. Why won't he listen to Bonnie Crombie and other Liberals and call a carbon tax?
This is just beyond humiliating at this point. Like Trudeau getting humiliated on Australian news, on American news, other Liberals from across the country, other mayors. Clearly this has highlighted a major problem in our Canadian system where the Prime Minister has too much power.
Speaker, Indigenous peoples across this country know better than most the costs of inaction on climate change, the impacts of extreme weather events, the impacts, quite frankly, of conservative underinvestment for years in the kind of infrastructure and supports they needed. We turned that around, Mr. Speaker. We started treating Indigenous peoples and communities as partners. We invested in fighting climate change. Of 8 out of 10 Canadians.
The Halifax longshoremen, the unionized workers, have just put out a statement. On Monday, the NDP has the opportunity to reinforce that they will not bring in back-to-work legislation by supporting their own leaders' words. And below are those words in a copy of the common sense conservative motion calling the Liberals, quoting the NDP Liberal leader as saying, the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. Will the NDP Liberals stand with unions and vote non-confidence in this costly government?
We can tell, Mr. Speaker, why the Conservative leader is so desperate to bring Parliament to a halt, to prevent debate on matters that are actually going to deliver for Canadians. As we support Canadians, as we make investments that are growing the economy and showing up for Canadians, like the tax break over the next few months, the Conservative leader sees that we're actually solving some of the challenges that the global economy has tossed our way.
The global economy has tossed our way, folks. That's what it was. This guy is unreal.
His own party doesn't agree with him. He's so weak. The NDP keeps him in power while the Liberal Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador is attacking his energy cap. The Liberal Premier says that this reduction of 35% in Newfoundland's energy production is already sending investment away. We understand that President Trump wants to take our money in jobs, but why is the Prime Minister standing against his own Liberal Premier in Newfoundland and Labrador to help Trump do it?
Across the country, except on the Conservative benches, Canadians know climate change is real. The multi-billion-dollar profitable industry that is the oil and gas industry right now has an unlimited ability to emit emissions into the atmosphere. Unlimited pollution. That's why we're putting a cap on emissions, not on production, Mr. Speaker.
That's factually false. The industry's emissions have been regulated for decades, Mr. Speaker, and he just wants to shut down their production and give more of the money and jobs to Donald Trump and the United States of America. And then there's the electricity tax. He calls it a regulation, but now we know that it's a tax because the independent Ontario energy operator says that this new regulation tax will drive up costs for families by $175 a year and will drive factories, mines, and mills south of the border. Why is it killing jobs with high electricity prices?
Just another tax from Justin Trudeau, just nailing the coffin to Canadians. There isn't someone who hates Canada more than Justin Trudeau.
Mr. Speaker, our oil and gas emissions cap is a cap on emissions, not on production, Mr. Speaker. No sector should be allowed unlimited pollution, and it's unfortunate the Conservatives continue to defend that incredibly profitable sector that is costing Canadians so much.
There's too much pollution coming out of Trudeau's mouth. Should regulate that.
Head of the government, responsible for monitoring who comes in our borders and who leaves our borders. So surely he'll be able to answer a very simple question. How many are in Canada illegally?
One of the things that has distinguished Canada from many countries around the world is our immigration system has always been supported by Canadians, by our citizens from coast to coast to coast, because it is a strong and robust system that adjusts according to the needs of our population, of our economy, of our growth paths, of our housing starts. And that is exactly what we continue to do. Where the Conservative leader is once again seeking to divide Canadians, seeking to import right-wing rhetoric from south of the border, we are going to continue to stay.
This guy, for real? Here he spent a good 6 to 8 months insulting Donald Trump with this stuff. He's bringing it up when he's trying to negotiate with Trump. Like, what an idiot.
True to our Canadian values, deliver a strong and robust immigration system that meets Canadians' values and expectations.
À propos des crédits, Monsieur
Negotiation on the checks, does it have to be your version of the eligibility, or if the Liberals meet you halfway, is that good enough?
Well, we've laid out our concerns. The fact that someone earning $149,000 is going to get a check, you're telling me a senior couple, none of them are going to get any help at all? That is wrong. And so we pointed that out to the Liberals. I said very clearly, I'm not going to support a situation where seniors don't get a check, but someone earning $149,000 does. That is wrong. They need to fix it.
What's your reaction to Minister Sajjan accepting free tickets for the Taylor Swift concert?
Well, first of all, I love Taylor Swift. So the Swifties out there, don't come at me. I think she's amazing. But given the cost of living crisis we're in right now, the idea that the minister would get 2 free tickets, taxpayer-funded tickets, is concerning, and it shows a lack of judgment.
Those tickets are worth $8,000 each. How many of us are getting a $16,000 handout from the government? He needs to pay for that with interest every day that he doesn't pay that back. And if he doesn't pay it back in the next 30 days, he needs to go to jail.
Speaking of politicians who say one thing and do another, you initially said your oppo motion was going to be on abortion, and now you've changed that. Why?
It's still a very important priority for us. We're going to make sure we continue to fight to expand access. Given the urgency we're up against, that there's a measure in place that's going to increase taxes in a couple of months, we want to put back our idea on the table that we need GST relief that's permanent. We need it to include monthly bills, and the checks have to be fixed. The checks have to include seniors and people living with disabilities. So that's urgent. Those checks need to get out to folks, and we want to make sure that it doesn't exclude the people that need it the most.
Interesting. He's changing his opposition day motion. I think he did that whole press conference. He put out that whole thing with the abortion, that he was going to do that as his opposition day so he wouldn't get backlash when it happened. He wanted to ease people into it, that he wasn't going to call out the government and try to take down Trudeau. No. There's only one thing on this guy's mind. We know what that is.
Yeah, so we've raised that concern. I said it now as an example. The fact that someone earning $149,000 a year would get a check, but a senior would not, someone living with disabilities would not, is clearly wrong. So I'm leaving it to the Liberals. They created this idea. They should fix it, but I've set out it should not exclude the people that need it most. It should not exclude seniors. It should not exclude people living with disabilities. They can figure it out. They're the government. But it should not exclude the people that need it most.
Going back to the beginning of this press conference, which is more of the same stuff, except for one moment here, which has to do with exactly that, with what he'd be changing his opposition day to.
So given the urgency of people getting help and our deep concern about the Liberals increasing taxes and saying they have checks to people that exclude those that are most vulnerable, we're going to be forcing a vote to expand the GST to cover monthly bills, like your cell phone and internet bill, and to make sure that it's permanent. In addition, we want to expand the checks to include seniors, that's retired workers, and people living with disabilities.
Interesting. So he's going to put forward a motion that cuts off GST permanently from all these things, from internet, cell phone providers. Will this be a motion of confidence, or will it just be a motion of a squirmy little weasel looking to get his pension? It's quite the session. Pierre Poilievre always bringing in the bombs there, dropping them on Trudeau. Trudeau's a loser and a weak leader. And there he goes again, running his mouth about far right wing, blah, 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 insulting Donald Trump when he's trying to negotiate with the guy. What an idiot. Speaking of idiots, we've got Jagmeet Singh having his own words used against him, looking forward towards Thursday. I don't think he's going to be voting for his own words. How many new taxes can Justin Trudeau put on Canadians before Canada breaks?